Do the sex.
Today's Talk Sex with Annette topic is the rise of political humiliation kink when ideology becomes foreplay. What if the thing that is tearing our country apart is also turning people on? Because the truth is, more and more couples are whispering things like, "Tell me you're my naughty little conservative slut," or "Admit you like being corrupted by a liberal in bed." And suddenly, the political humiliation kink is no longer on the fringe anymore. It is everywhere. Today, we are diving into a kink sitting right at the intersection of cultural shame, rebellion, and erotic role play, the political humiliation kink. Why does this work? Why now? And how do you explore it without turning your bedroom into a political battlefield? To help us unpack all of this, I am joined by someone whose expertise in kinks and sexual liberation makes her the perfect guide. Gigi Engle is an accredited certified sex and relationship psychotherapist, award-winning author, and internationally recognized sex educator. She is an associate clinician at Therapy Yard, working extensively with LGBTQIA clients and kinky folks and people in open and/or polyamorous relationships. She's also the author of Kink Curious and All the Fucking Mistakes, and 2025's nomination for Sexologist of the Year. Oh, Gigi, can you tell my listeners more about you?
Sure. So, I think your intro was pretty extensive there, but I am a psychosexual and relationship therapist. I'm based in London, where I've lived for 5 years, and I work with kinky clients and the LGBTQ community pretty exclusively. And I just wrote a new book that's a guide for beginners to explore their more taboo desires in a really trauma-informed and fun, hands-on kind of way. So I think it's really accessible for anybody who's interested in exploring kink of the whole spectrum of it, really goes into depth. And I am also a writer for all your favorite magazines, such as Cosmo and Women's Health, where you can find me talking about kinks and fetishes in a nuanced and journalist-focused lens.
So, perfect guide for this topic. And you want to stay to the end because, of course, right now, politics, well, they're not just a hot topic. They are infiltrating, of course, all areas of our lives. If you're finding this kink showing up in the bedroom or in your dating life, this is going to help you direct it and play with it in a way that doesn't destroy a potential relationship or your current relationship, and hopefully can lead to a fun, kinky, turned on time. So by the end, we're going to give you, as usual, our takeaways so that you can start engaging in this kink should you want to, starting tonight. So let's talk about politics and sex, I guess, in a positive way. Cheers.
Cheers.
Gigi, when we say political humiliation kink, what exactly are we talking about?
It's a pretty big term, but really what we're looking at is people who are essentially role-playing different conservative or liberal ideologies for the most part. So one partner might be the conservative party, the other partner might be the liberal party, and they're basically using these opposing views as a part of their dominant and submissive dynamic. So somebody might be, for example, you might be a more dominant female partner and you are wearing your leather corset and spanking your partner, telling them they're a dirty little conservative pig or something along those lines. So really bringing some of the very charged feelings we have about politics into a safe and contained kinky space.
In this dynamic, are people pretending to be in those roles, or are they actually of that political mindset? Or can it be a mix of both?
I would say probably a mix of both. I would say most likely it's going to be people who are role playing the roles, but there's definitely people who are in have mixed political ideologies in their relationships, and they may choose to use these differing ideologies in a safe way where they can kind of play with them in a way that isn't so charged as it might be if you're sitting at the dinner table and having an argument about politics. It's kind of a way to bring some of that into a safer space that's kinkier rather than emotionally charged.
Maybe it's a little bit of a way to work out their frustrations with each other, keep the relationship alive. Why is this kink rising right now in this particular political climate?
I think it's pretty obvious that we are pretty much more divided than we ever have been in the political landscape we have in the United States. And the more partisan these parties become and the more intense we become passionate about our ideologies, and the wider the gap is coming between them, it makes sense that as this rift is happening and as we are moving in this sort of polar opposite effect, that this would start to become more and more relevant and salient. And when it comes to sexuality and exploration, when something like politics is so imbued in everything that we see and experience in our day-to-day life, it makes sense that there might be some overlap with sexuality.
Well, so that leads me to ask what makes political tension such fertile ground for erotic charge?
I think that what makes it so appealing for people is that there are a lot of emotions that come up with the way we feel about politics. Really, you can feel really passionate about something, really angry about certain things. And often when we feel that way, we can experience arousal from that. And so sometimes it can be part of the arousal process. And when we're talking about humiliation kink, when we're talking about politics particularly, there can be, I think, a real erotic spark in being able to humiliate somebody in a safe and consensual way that both people are agreeing to when you feel so passionately that they're wrong.
Is this a newer phenomenon or has the political humiliation kink always existed? Because honestly, I haven't really heard about it until recently.
I think it's been around as long as politics have been around. There's not, unsurprisingly, not a ton of data on this. It's not like people are going out and studying this particularly. But I think it's been around for a long time. Like before recently, when it's sort of become more of this Democrat versus Republican dynamic that we're seeing, I definitely had seen where people were really sexually attracted to dictators. So they would have a partner who was role playing as, say, like Vladimir Putin, and that was part of their kind of kink role play, which, couldn't be me, but like, I see the appeal of like this sort of bad guy who's in power and like he's submitting to you as the dominatrix. So I think the idea that politics has played a role in sex, I think has been around for a very long time. But I do think that this particular brand of it is becoming very popular nowadays and much more trendy.
You know, what it brings to mind instantly for me is a Game of Thrones, Daenerys, and what was the name of her husband? Listeners, I hope you guys know, but her husband, who she sold to, that Jason Momoa plays, this was considered one of the most erotic dynamics, right? And it was very much that two different ideologies and then her power as a sub to like transform him. It
Mhm.
sounds like a lot of that might come into play. Also, the idea of coming together with someone who has different ideologies that maybe through seduction you can move in a direction.
Yeah, that's a really good point. definitely think there's an element of that where it's kind of like, I'm going to be like this sexy liberal person who you can't resist, and I'm going to get you to change your mind. Like that, I think is definitely a big pull of it as well.
Part of it, yeah. So, do people raised in rigid moral or political systems eroticize rebellion or corruption at maybe, let's say, a higher level than maybe someone who wasn't? And might they perhaps be more likely to engage in this kind of dynamic?
I think it's kind of hard to say people have such subjective experiences. I could definitely see how that could happen for sure. Because when you grow up with really rigid ideologies, and if you, for instance, as an example, like if you grew up in a really conservative household and you are now a really conservative household with really conservative parents, and you are now living this life of perhaps you're queer and you're living more in your authentic space, like the idea of political fraught emotionality is probably something that's very front and center in your psyche. So that could definitely play a role in how a kink like this could develop.
So we've primarily talked about this as a kink that's going to show up in the bedroom. What about before we even get to the bedroom and we're in the dating world? I've noticed back when I was single myself that there were times I felt like I was catnip to the conservative guy, right? And I've talked to many singles dating who are like, oh, I don't women, liberal women who are like, "Man, I don't know why, but I'm so attracted to, like, these idiot conservative men, sexually and so on and so forth." Does kink, when it's not something you know that you're experiencing, show up in your dating life and who you pursue? And is that problematic, or can it just be converted into something positive?
I think when people are attracted to people with very different political beliefs, it's not so much that it's because they have the different political beliefs, it's more that they might be attracted to a certain type of person, somebody who comes from a certain background or looks a specific way, and then it sort of has that kind of overlap, especially if we're talking about heterosexual dynamics, because the stats themselves just show that, it's women who are mostly liberal and men who are mostly conservative. And so I think a lot of heterosexual women will find themselves, unbeknownst to them, being attracted to conservatives just by the statistics alone. And there's something wrong with wanting to pursue a relationship with somebody who has different political ideologies than you do, as long as it's not something you find completely morally reprehensible and it goes against all of your beliefs. And it's also possible to have a relationship with somebody like that that is purely a kink dynamic. For instance, you could have a partner you play with who's just a kink partner or a sexual partner, and there's somebody who you can engage with this kind of kink with within that kind of structured dynamic without having to have the intensity of having an actual relationship with somebody whose political ideology goes against everything you believe in.
This is an interesting little take on this kink. Is it more prevalent than in the heterosexual dynamic than in the LGBTQ queer dynamic?
I would definitely say that's very highly likely because you're not going to find a lot of conservative queer people. Like there are some, but the percentage of queer people being conservative is quite low because conservative politics is not particularly in favor of LGBTQ rights. So I think that just statistically it would have to be accurate.
Right. I can't and remember in any of my dynamics with any of my female partners that coming up. However, I think without naming it, I've definitely experienced some of this political kink being acted out, but not consciously, right? So that brings me to how, if people aren't aware of this kink, but yet it's playing out in their dating life, it's playing out in their bedroom life, can it be destructive to their dynamic if not properly addressed or played out with what I would consider sort of your standard BDSM or kink playbook rules?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the three main tenets of my book are consent, communication, and aftercare. So if you're not really explicitly naming what it is that you're doing and you're not talking about it, you're not having safe words, you're not acknowledging the play that you're engaging with, it can have the potential to have a bleed over effect into the rest of your relationship. And it doesn't stay inside of the safe container that you build in a kink dynamic. So it is really important that we're having these conversations, even if it's uncomfortable. But sometimes naming the elephant in the room is a really big pillar in building trust and safe relationships with people.
So you're going to have to address what you're doing. You can't, which
Yeah.
I think can be feel shameful to some people. And why would it feel shameful to some people if suddenly they recognize, oh, I'm doing this thing that now has the name political humiliation kink?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are wary when they about addressing it if they are having this play out in their life and they haven't named it, because it might be the way that you had said earlier, where it's like working out some of the aggression they might have towards the partner for having political ideas that they're very against, and so it's kind of an opportunity for them to sort of work some of that out in the bedroom, so to speak. But the problem is that it stops being, I don't know that it's so much kink in that instance as it is actual aggression if you're not actually discussing it and figuring out the rules, because consent is such a huge part of making this play ethical.
Correct. And if you don't understand what you're doing in the bedroom, then you aren't creating boundaries around when it goes too far for one person, right? So
Mhm.
maybe now moving to how this might be showing up in your relationship. Perhaps you're listening to this and you're thinking, we did kind of talk about politics while we were having sex the other night. Because I think this can show up in what people might consider very vanilla sexual encounters, and for people who might consider themselves very vanilla, you know? I know that if I think back on my experience, I've had moments where I was sleeping with someone or dating with someone and they've made some little comment like, "Oh, you like being dominated by conservative," or whatever. And I thought,
Mhm.
"That's a weird thing to say." Also, I didn't know, or whatever it was. So, one of the ways that this is going to show up, I imagine, first in a relationship where it hasn't been acknowledged and it's not been named nor boundaries made, is true language. So I'm curious about how political language which is normally weaponized. Think about snowflake, that's snowflakes have really become a weapon verbally in the political landscape. But how does that language become erotic in kink contexts?
Yeah, it's in humiliation kinks, you're going to see a lot of, and kink in general, there's going to be a lot of language that outside of the kink container, not going to be okay. People want to be called dirty little sluts and bitches. And, you know, they use the F word. Gay guys will use the F word with each other, like that, that kind of thing. And like inside of that container, and if you guys have agreed on that language, totally fine. So you use the same kind of political language that's used to demean somebody in a social context, like calling like, oh, you're being such a snowflake. But in the bedroom, it's used to be like, it now has this erotic charge. It now has this erotic power where you're using it purposely in a sexual and arousing context to degrade the other person in a way that's consensual. So you're not attacking their character. It's part of a role play scene. And so you can get that kind of erotic charge out of it and have that be really sexy, but it's contained and it's safe. And you know that it's not them basically just being horrible.
Right, like, even something as simple as saying in the middle of intimacy, "Oh, you like being dominated by a conservative man." Like, in the middle of intimacy, if we haven't talked about it, that's then the person who is not conservative is going to be like, "I actually don't like that," or, "What does it mean that I'm even with you right now?" And it pulls them out of the erotic landscape and into the battlefield, right?
Yeah. Mhm. It's like that you're playing at kink without without using the language and the skills of kink. It's like that because it's not kink if you're just saying that without somebody's consent and they don't like it. Like that's not hot.
Right, right. So, would you say that this kink typically starts with a verbal exchange? It's more verbal play.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the safest place to start and the very much the most accessible way to start. Because you kind of need a lot of what's going on with politics when we discuss politics in general, right? Is that we are discussing it. It is a verbal based discussion you're having about politics in general. So it makes sense that when you're creating the kink dynamic, it would start with that kind of heated debate like language. And then you can move into using other things like paddles and want to tie somebody up. You could add all that stuff in, but starting with like the language you're going to use and getting very clear on the boundaries of what's okay and what's not okay. Like for instance, you might be okay with snowflake, but you might not be okay with something else. And so you kind of have to get clear about what's going to be okay and what's not, with kind of the understanding that if you're just starting out, you might not know something is going to really upset you until it's said. And then that's why we have safe words, which are non-sexual words used to stop the play. You'd have that set ahead of time. And that way, if the person says something that you didn't realize was going to hit you in the wrong way, you can stop and be like, oh, wait, I actually don't like that. Let's not use that one. And it creates a dynamic where everybody feels, because the whole point of kink is like you're not actually fighting. You're not actually humiliating somebody. It's part of the erotic play. And so when you have it in that safe container, it's just a lot safer to explore that way.
But for people who are listening to this who aren't kinky or really kink aware, like for the most part, you're like, I'm mostly vanilla. Hearing the word humiliation in context of eroticism and sexual interaction might sound like, why would you want someone to humiliate you? It might sound awful. I think a lot of people sort of flinch at that. Can you talk a little bit about why humiliation can be erotic in the bedroom setting without being harmful?
Sure. So erotic humiliation, like when everybody is consenting and enjoying themselves for it, it's like the reason people have such a get such a kick out of humiliation in the bedroom. And even if you're the most humiliation, I understand, loaded word. But I think people also have to think about just their regular sexual dynamics. There's very often somebody who is doing the leading and somebody who is doing most of the following. So you kind of already have one partner who's being a little more dominant, one partner who's being a little more submissive. And, maybe your partner calls you like a little slut or something. And in that context of vanilla sex, you're like, oh, that's not humiliation. That they're just calling me a slut because I'm a dirty girl in bed. But like, actually, that is kind of a little bit of a humiliation kink, because the thing is, it's like it's about being dominated. It's about consensual power exchange. And for a lot of people, there's such a close connection with the feelings of humiliation and eroticism. They just are really closely connected in our brain and in our nervous system response. So that's why some people get like a really strong erotic charge out of it. But if the word humiliation is going to stop you from wanting to engage with any kind of like play that is in this sort of DS dynamic where you're saying quote unquote meaner things to each other, you don't have to call it humiliation. It can just be like politics kink, or like role play politics kink, or whatever you want to call it. The humiliation aspect isn't necessary.
Yeah, as you're talking, I was thinking about how this particular kink has played out across time. Lots of people like to, in role play, right? Like to role play the king or the conqueror, taking the princess or the peasant. That is sort of an origin story of the political kink, right? But it's in a dynamic that seems so far from us until now. So it has been around for a long time. And if you're a kinkster who has already been doing role play, you've probably been engaging in some type of this dynamic, depending on what you're into.
Yeah, it's a lot of the appeal is kind of being so irresistible to the other person that despite you being so different, they can't resist you because you're so seductive or you're so alluring. And that's part of it as well. Like with this you don't necessarily need the humiliation aspect of it so much as it is like our ideologies are so different that you can't resist me because I'm such a seductress, that kind of thing.
It's the forbidden fruit as
Mhm.
well. A little bit of the forbidden fruit that comes into it. So, what are some signs that a couple should not engage in this kink in the bedroom?
I would say if you are brand new to kink, this might be a difficult one to take on right away, and I would probably start with something more like sensation play and stuff that's a little more easy and basic and a little less intense with the emotions. I would also be really careful if you and your partner really have true IRL opposing political ideologies. Like be it might not go the sexy way you think it is if you truly believe that your partner has these like really upsetting and problematic beliefs and vice versa. And trying to bring that into the bedroom might be great or it might not be. So I would say it's going to take a lot of negotiation beforehand. And also if your relationship is in a really rocky place, which a lot of relationships these days where we have opposing political ideologies are due to how polarized everything has become, starting kink in a really rocky place can be sort of dangerous territory. What you kind of want to do first is go to therapy and try to get your relationship back on track and in solid footing before you start introducing kind of all this outside play into it, because kink is not going to fix the underlying issues that are plaguing your relationship.
Right. So, if you recognize that this is a turn on for you, I can see two different scenarios. You recognize that it's a turn on for you with your current partner, either because they have a different ideology, just enough that it's kind of come up in your conversations and you notice that that's part of what attracts you, or you engaged in some debate with them and gotten turned on. Or you're currently with a partner of the same political ideology and you find yourself fantasizing about people or partners a potential affair with or encounter with someone of a different ideology.
Mhm.
So in this case, let's say with a partner who's of the same ideology of yours. So two conservative people, we'll say two conservative people. And one of you is like, oh, I noticed that I get turned on by this idea, or I'm starting to fantasize about being with someone who's liberal. How do you bring that to your partner and say, can we play with this without it like getting real weird real quick?
Well, first you want to have the timing, tone, and turf is what I call it with conversations, where you are making sure the timing of the conversation is not during sex and not in a really emotionally charged environment like the bedroom. So you want to sit down and have a conversation in like a safe space, like your living room. Maybe you guys are having dinner together, whatever it is, and you need to get consent for that conversation. So you can say something like, our sex life means a lot to me. It's really important to me. I would really like to experiment with some more things. I've specifically been thinking, and I know this might sound a little odd, so bear with me. I've had this strange like fantasy about being with somebody who's liberal, and I don't know what it is about it, but it just like turns me on, probably because it's so taboo and like it's not somebody I would ever actually want to be with, but like something about that gets me going. Is that a role play scenario you'd be open to trying? And it's really important that when partners are coming to this conversation, they're coming to it very empathetically towards each other rather than seeing anything as being like an attack on them. So they immediately become defensive, because that can often happen when we're talking about sex. We were never really taught how to talk about sex. We're taught how to be, good friends, good siblings, all that, but we're never taught how to be good partners and lovers. So it's kind of an uncomfortable conversation for people to have to begin with. So you have to be willing to give your partner a really generous interpretation that they're coming to you not to say that your sex life is not good, but because they have this curiosity and they genuinely want to like play and expand with you. And I think that that's kind of where you start with it. And I think it'd be really helpful to start looking at once you've had some of these conversations, if they're open to it, looking at some of the erotic material that's online, like be it like stories that center on this, like erotic stories. There's definitely some great OnlyFans content and porn content that sort of centers on this, just so you can kind of get an idea of what's going on with all of that. I think shared media with partners can be such a bonding experience. I know it's a controversial topic for some couples, but it can be great for people who are open to that. And yeah, just sort of starting to get curious about it. Like that's where I would begin.
Yeah, I think shared media, if both partners feel comfortable with it, is such a great way to educate and share ideas and fantasies, because then it also takes having to explain it in depth with your own words. It takes not off the table, but it takes the pressure off of that a little
Absolutely.
bit. Like, hey, watch
Yeah.
this. How do you feel?
I just think it's really important that couples are coming to this with an open mind and are willing to be a little bit more curious with each other. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think because I'm more liberal, and with liberalism, oftentimes sex positive tends to go more hand in hand. I'm also queer. Again, I think sex positivity and kink is a little bit more accepted in the LGBTQ community and in more liberal communities, right? It's something that's talked about a lot. This conversation might be easier. It might make more sense. But if you are someone who leans conservative or even religiously conservative, but you have liberal ideals, having this conversation could be very hard.
Oh,
I would think it would be
absolutely.
harder.
Mhm.
And perhaps one of the easier ways to introduce it is to talk about, hey, like even like some light role play, and then you can slip in those role dynamics, right? Like, hey,
Yeah.
how about doing a little role play? And you can be like, oh, yeah, the professor student is fun, but what about conservative liberal play?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely harder if you're conservative, especially with all this. So many people, so many conservatives also are Christians, and the big population evangelical Christians. So not exactly the most sex positive folk, but I do think that it's still. I mean, data shows that conservative states are just as kinky in their fantasies and their erotic material as everywhere else. They're just not really talking about it. So I can understand how that's sort of a difficult topic when you don't have the language and when it is so taboo in the culture that you've grown up in. But like you said, it is easy to not easy, but it's a kind of a good gateway to kind of use the word, role play rather than saying I don't know if I would go right for want to do political humiliation king. that might just be a bit much. Language is important, and you want to be as gentle as possible.
Do you think there's a spike in one side or the other, an interest in political humiliation?
I definitely do not have a solid answer on that one because we just don't have the numbers for it. I think that people where politics has been more rigid in their lives and their upbringing are going to be more likely to have this, whether that's liberal or conservative. I think in conservative states in general and in conservative communities in general, you'll see a lot more intense kinks being searched for in like Pornhub and those sorts of erotic spaces, because it's not that they are more kinky, it's just that they have these like niche interests that they're not able to talk about or express. So that's why they're looking for it more in an erotic material space. But I think the more charged and the more passionate you feel about politics, the more it might turn you on. I could see how it with conservative ideology, because there's so much more sex positivity with liberals, and you kind of have you kind of have so many more options for fetishes and kinks that are available to you because of the community. If you're in conservative politics and so much of your life is built around church and football and family, it might be that politics is really where you're getting your erotic charge because it's one of the only kinds of kinks you have access to.
I'm speaking only from personal experience. I haven't heard this come from my more liberal acquaintances as much as I've definitely heard, especially more conservative men talk about being turned on by more liberal women. And that, I think you're right, that there is the aspect of more sex positivity, more openness, women being more open to exploratory and adventurous intimacy, right? Being open to trying new things. We don't necessarily see kinks as this bad thing. We don't necessarily freak out if you're like, hey, how do you feel about a threesome or exploring with other people? For more liberal people, it's maybe I'm open to that or not into that, but maybe not the shame piece doesn't come into it as much.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of conservative men, they are attracted to, sort of going outside of the kink space for a second here, but they are attracted to liberal women sexually because they are attracted to the vibe of a liberal woman who is sort of sexually adventurous, is much more open about her sexuality, more comfortable in that space. And so that I could definitely understand the sexual appeal of that. Like, oh, I want to take away your bodily autonomy, but you're really hot.
Thank you, sir. But no, thank you.
It's so tempting.
So bizarre to me, but you want to stop me from being able to give you this thing I can give you because I have the right to be who I am. Anyways, what a conundrum for you. And exhausting. It's exhausting. All right. So now we've offered some ways for, especially in a conservative on conservative relationship, to introduce this topic to your partner and embark on it should they be open to it. Now, it's much easier if you are in a dynamic where it's either conservative and liberal marriage or partnership or two liberals, right? Or more liberal people. And look, it's a spectrum. Let's be honest. Political views are a spectrum, but I'm giving more extremes because that gives you plenty of tools for conversations. Are there any complications you can see coming in to play between, let's say, two more liberal individuals in a relationship or a liberal and a conservative?
Oh, like if it's mixed political ideology? If you actually do have mixed political ideology, you can play with this kink, but it needs to be done with a lot of care, because at that point, the things you're saying to the other person are quite likely things you mean. And that can be fraught with a lot more emotionality. Like, for instance, in a classic humiliation dom sub instance, we're taking politics out of it for a second. You're humiliating your sub and spanking him and telling him he's a bad boy and pegging him and all these sorts of things. But you don't actually believe he's a filthy little pig, or you don't actually believe these things about him as a person. This is part of your like kink dynamic, and you believe it in the moment in your little container, but like it's not that deep. Whereas if you are actually in a mixed political household, bringing the kink in has the potential to it could go a little sour if somebody starts saying things that they really mean in a meaner way. I would be concerned about how that might play out. It's not impossible, but it would be a tough one.
So to avoid that dynamic, could you in advance talk about here's a political topic or an angle that we need to stay away from in the bedroom because either it's going to spark something aggressively angry in me or because I think that when we talk about this topic, you really dislike me.
Yeah, of course. That's pretty much that's how you do it, right? It's about if you are in a solid relationship with somebody who has opposing political ideologies to you, and you're able to have these conversations and talk about what is and what is not on the table, and be really clear about the boundaries, the subjects you can talk about. Like, for instance, it's like maybe we're not going to bring up abortion during that kink scene. Like, that's not going to be something we're going to say. We're not talking about taking away my rights to have to my bodily autonomy, or we're not going to talk about LGBTQ rights. Don't say it. And we're not going to do that because that's going to get me riled up. And so everybody has their own boundaries around things that they feel particularly passionate about or particularly angry about. And we need to be really mindful of that and need to be really clear that just because you are engaging in this kink dynamic with a partner does not give you free rein to say anything you want. It has to be really well negotiated beforehand. And that's how we keep everybody safe.
Great. So, guys, we've given you intro conversations to have with this kink. We've explained that you need to create boundaries ahead of time, have the conversation, safe words. What do you say? You know, when you want it to stop, when you're like, this is going off the rails and I'm now angry and not turned on. But can we give them some tools? Like, okay, now you know you've got this kink. You want to engage in it. You know how you're going to, bring up the conversation and negotiate. What are some ways in which you can engage with it? Like, what
I
things can you talk about? And then where can you go from there?
I think that you guys should talk about exactly, first of all, both of you need to talk about what it is exactly about this that turns you on. Like, what is the exact dynamic? Like, is your partner pretending to be Megyn Kelly? And like, is it very like specific? I know, ew. But is it like, oops, sorry guys, not to kink shame, but for real, your partner's being Megyn Kelly and is like, like you're now dominating her because she's Megyn Kelly, and you're like, I got you. And that's the dynamic you're setting up. Is that like specifically what you want? You kind of need to figure out exactly what it is. Are you playing specific roles? Are you just a sort of, are you guys just liberal and conservative? Like, is that the vibe? Or are you someone specific? Are there outfits involved? Is there particular kinds of play that you want to have? Do you want to do spanking? Is there going to be bondage? Is there other stuff that you want to have be a part of that? I would start with just introducing the role play dynamics before you actually go into more like bondage and spanking and stuff, because you kind of want to see how this plays out. And you want to get really clear about what that's going to look like for both of you. And I think you also have to be really understanding with each other that like neither of you really knows what you're doing yet. And it might be weird and it might be uncomfortable and awkward the first few times you even do it because you're just figuring it out. So you guys have to give each other space and empathy for laughter and feeling uncomfortable and awkward because it's going to take some practice. So give yourself grace.
It's great. So you can either role play as yourselves or you can pick characters. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff you could do to JD Vance. He's written his own role in this dynamic.
Yeah, you could be
Very
JD Vance and they could be the couch.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
they say romance is dead.
You know somebody has engaged in this, right? Like, this is a scene that's
Oh,
already been played out across the US.
there's no doubt. No doubt in my mind.
Here's the last question, because guys, you look, we've given it to you. You know now what you're going to do or not do with this. But I am curious if you have any stats or thoughts on this. How many affairs do you think take place because someone gets so turned on by engaging with someone else of the opposite ideology that that's that they seek out a side piece or an experience that is with a charged hot person of the opposite political affiliation?
I think if this is a kink that you have, or it's something you might not know you have, but you do, that would be a huge draw because it's the whole thing. One of the things that really gets people going sexually is the, like you said, the forbidden fruit and the taboo, and doing something that would be be looked down with this displeasure from your social group. And so it feels really dirty, it feels really wrong. And so that really already gives it such an electric charge. And so I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of affairs began this way. And it wouldn't shock me.
No, it wouldn't shock me either. I recently did an interview just about Grindr and how, who knows, apparently it's not a complete myth, but you always hear about when the Republican convention comes together, Grindr going down. Apparently it actually has happened once or twice, but it would make sense to me that this would be something that can be such a fantasy, such a draw that it might lead to affairs. So for people wanting to avoid a desire pulling a partner away, learn how to act like a liberal woman. But
There we go. That was the message all along. You're welcome,
all
everyone.
along. Absolutely. No, it's really important that we take care of our sex life in the bedroom. And there are all kinds of fantasies that we want to play out. But it's really important to admit to yourself and to know what kind of kink, what kind of fantasy you're playing into, and make sure your partner's on board. And I think, Gigi, you did a really good job of breaking this down. This is not something that I've seen in a lot of mainstream media. It's something that I think people are afraid to talk about at this time, especially in American history. But I also think it's super important, right?
Mhm.
To keep us all emotionally healthy, especially in our relationships. So thank you so much. Can you tell my listeners where they can find out more about you and connect with you outside of this episode?
Sure. You can find me on my website, missgigiengle.com. I'm also Gigi Engle on Instagram. I have a newsletter on Substack called The G Spot, and my new book, Kink Curious, is available for pre-order in the US and the UK at all your local retailers.
Thank you so much. Hey guys, go out there and get kinky, flog your conservative partner, but only with consent. All right? You've got a go bag of tricks for this kink. You can be more self-aware now. Thank you so much, Gigi, for joining me and helping explain this to me and my listeners.
Absolutely.
And to my listeners, until next time, I'll see you in the locker room. Cheers.